Welcome to a new video and a new camera comparison between the mini or compact flagship devices, the Xperia 5 Mark IV against the Zenfone 9. So let's get started. So let's check out the camera specs first. We have a 50 megapixel main gimbal stabilized camera on the Zenfone 9, as well as a 12 megapixel ultra wide angle, and on the Xperia we have three cameras. We have a main 24mm 12 megapixel, we have a 16mm ultra wide angle 12 megapixel, and we have a 2.5 times 60mm telephoto, also 12 megapixels, and on the front both also feature 12 megapixel front facing shooters, and I think we start off with those. So this is now the front facing video camera of the Zenfone 9, 12 megapixels, 4K 30 frames per second it can record, and it also has autofocus, which is pretty nice. It's a bit of a gloomy day right now, there's a bit of sun there in the front, so maybe if I turn around a little bit you can see a little bit there of HDR eventually, but it's a bit of a bad day. What do you think about the front facing camera here on the Zenfone 9 and the stabilization colors and so on? And now I'm recording on the brand new 12 megapixel front facing shooter of the Xperia 5 Mark IV. This one is not so brand new because we saw this already on the Xperia 1 Mark IV, so it is the same kind of sensor. I think it's a good sensor, even though it doesn't feature autofocus. It's a larger sensor, so lets in a little bit more light because of larger pixels as well, because it's also 12 megapixels. 4K 30 frames per second. I think Sony also managed to do well with the stabilization this time, and I think also HDR is working fine. I see a little bit there. Let's turn around a little bit to see if we can see a little bit there on the background as well. I think yes, it's working fine. So what do you think about stabilization, colors and so on the Xperia 5 Mark IV? So now we have the gimbal stabilized lens on the Zenfone 9, 4K 30 frames per second, and this one has the capability to stabilize very well thanks to its gimbal. So even if I'm walking here on uneven ground, it should be very stable. Though it has a big of an issue with this Asus default native camera application. It's sometimes focusing on the back instead of me. My beautiful face, why are you not focusing on me? Anyway, maybe it is focusing right now because I just did tap to focus, tapped it again, hopefully it's working nicely, I'm not so sure. Sometimes going into the center helps. We will see. One thing that we can do with this one is also record 4K 30 on the ultra wide angle, and we can switch during recording. So let's switch to the ultra wide angle here. Now we have the ultra wide angle. What do you think about this one here? 4K 30 as well. Stabilization also very good here on 4K 30, and I think it is a good vlogging camera together with the capability to record via external audio, which is pretty nice as well. What do you think about this one here? One thing that you notice immediately on the Xperia 5 Mark IV is that on the main lens we have a little bit of a wider field of view, even though it's also 24mm technically, but the gimbal is cropping in. I think that has some EIS on the Zenfone that we also have here. It is also cropping in a little bit, but by far not so much as on the Zenfone 9. What do you think about the quality here and the stabilization of the Xperia 5 Mark IV? What I can also do is during recording using the volume keys, I can zoom out to the ultra wide angle. This is now the ultra wide angle at 4K 30 frames per second that you can see here right now. Sun is out right now, so we can do a little bit of an HDR test here. So what do you think about this one here? Oh, a little bit overblown probably, because it's a bit of an unfair test because the Zenfone didn't have so much good conditions here. And yeah, what do you think about this one? Cool thing about this one is we have also a zoom lens here, a telephoto lens. So what I can do is I can zoom in on this ship, for example, just by pressing here, going to the 60mm one, zooming in clearly, and if I want to go even further, I have the possibility to zoom in even further, and I think it's doing a pretty good job. We are now at 180mm, which is roughly I think 5 times zoom, if I'm not completely mistaken. So yeah, it looks pretty good on screen, and I think it is also Very good. We start off with the photos and the ultra-wide angle. On the left, always the Zenfone 9, on the right, the Xperia 5 Mark IV. Sorry, but there was like a lighting change between the one and the other photo, but nevertheless, we want to compare it. This is the ultra-wide angle. Let's zoom in. What we can clearly see is over processing on the Zenfone 9. It is sharpening and blurring things up a little bit more, overdoing it basically on the Zenfone 9. We have much more details on the Xperia 5 Mark IV on the ultra-wide angle, especially also towards the edges. The Zenfone 9 gets a little bit more unsharp, and also when you take a look at the tree here, it is a less sharp on the Zenfone 9. It's a bit more sharp on the 5 Mark IV, and the same goes for the side here. The fence, for example, looks a lot better here on the 5 Mark IV than on the Zenfone. I would even say the HDR looks a bit more natural, where the Zenfone is overdoing it a little bit, but both struggling here for sure. The Zenfone 9 on paper is a little bit wider than the Xperia 5 Mark IV. I could not see much of it here, however, in my test. When it comes to zoom lens, the zoom lens is, I think, the Xperia 5 Mark IV's specialty because it has a dedicated 60mm zoom. It's not like the biggest change or the biggest difference between them two, but yeah, we can clearly see the Zenfone 9 is only cropping into the main sensor, 50 megapixels, and at this 2.5 times zoom. It's a bit dark on this 5 Mark IV for some reason, but the detail level is much better, and that's clearly seen here that the Zenfone 9 is over processing. When we take a look at the 5 times zoom, which is an option on the 5 Mark IV. I think it is some kind of hybrid zoom that they're using here. You can clearly see again on the first glance much more natural on the Xperia 5 Mark IV. I don't even have to zoom in, but if I zoom in, you can clearly see, okay, there's a bit of processing going on, but it's much clearer. Look at the belt here, much more details on the 5 Mark IV for sure. We take a look at the maximum zoom, 8 times on the Zenfone 9 and 7.5 times on the Xperia 5 Mark IV. Nothing much changes here. I think the Xperia 5 Mark IV is, yeah, borderline okay still. The Zenfone 9, no, it's just horrible. So zoom lens, definitely a win for the Xperia 5 Mark IV. When it comes to the main lens, actually it should be a win, an easy win for the Zenfone 9. We can see here a bit of color difference, a bit warmer kind of colors, especially in the cloud. You can clearly see it on the 5 Mark IV and a little bit cooler on the Zenfone 9. When we take a look at the zoom shot here, I mean 100% crop in, you can see it looks a bit sharp on the Zenfone 9, but it's a bit of over processed on the Zenfone 9, especially look at the clouds, how much more natural they are looking on the 5 Mark IV. And when we go towards the edges, you can clearly see, yeah, it looks a little bit more detailed there. So it's not only over sharpening on the Zenfone 9 part, it is clearly a bit more detailed here because it is cropping, not cropping, it's pixel binning together from 50 megapixels. When we take a look at the next shot, which is the ultra-wide angle again, you can clearly see the Zenfone 9 is doing better with HDR. We can clearly see a little bit more of brightened up shadows here, where the 5 Mark IV is a bit struggling. But what we have, of course, as well is, look at the chimneys, a bit more sharper, detailed, clearer chimney tops here on the 5 Mark IV that we don't see so much on the Zenfone. So the Zenfone has better HDR, but less sharpness. The main lens, again a nice shot. The brighter shot on the Zenfone 9 clearly indicates better HDR again than on the Xperia 5 Mark IV. 5 Mark IV, by the way, taken in auto mode where HDR was also kicking in, but you can clearly see, yeah, it was not doing such a great job. But what we also can clearly see is that the Zenfone 9 is like falling apart because it is doing so much over processing. Look at the sky, look at the ships, look at, it's horrible. It's just like very horrible to look at. It is, yeah, it probably has more details there as well, but this over processing, over sharpening things up and overdoing it here is just so unnatural that it's horrible in my opinion. And I would every day take the 5 Mark IV, even if it's not so detailed, but it looks at least like a photo, like a true photography or photo that I took, and not like an art painting like on the Zenfone 9. So the next shot is in low light situations. The Zenfone 9 has a gimbal stabilization, a bigger sensor. It's winning here. We have greener kind of color tint on the 5 Mark IV. For some reason it's darker. Again, the processing is not helping the Zenfone 9. Look at the text here, like over processed, and it looks much more natural on the 5 Mark IV. So the 5 Mark IV has like more noise creeping in already, is a bit unsharp here, where the sharpening here helps on the Zenfone 9. So in general, I think the Zenfone 9 wins it, but you can clearly see there's noise creeping in on the Zenfone 9 as well, and this over processing is almost killing it here on this side, where here, yeah, there's noise, but it's not over processing it so much. So yeah, this is the normal low light situation. Ultra dark situation looks like this. The Zenfone 9 clearly wins here. This is night mode on both. The Xperia 5 Mark IV of course has a night mode, but it's an automatic one that automatically turns itself on, just like on iPhones, for example. And you can clearly see, yeah, there's a bit of detail here, but it is too dark in general. And here it's very, very noisy on the Zenfone 9, but we can clearly see a little bit more on what I was photographing. But we have an ace up its sleeve on the Xperia 5 Mark IV. I can go into manual mode and again have a 0.5 seconds exposure here with the highest ISO. And you can clearly see, yeah, I can clearly see a little bit more than on the Zenfone 9 even. It is not so sharp, but I think the noise is better controlled. There's a bit like maybe over-processed noise reduction going on the 5 Mark IV. But I can clearly see that this is a red accent here on the grip of this screwdriver, which I don't see on the Zenfone 9. For the Zenfone 9, however, I can go into night mode, dedicated night mode, and can set there a 7 seconds exposure night mode, and this one looks better. Then we can clearly see it is sharper, it has a little bit more noise because not so aggressive noise reduction. We can also see the red handle, yeah, a little bit there. It's still not as bright as on the Xperia, which is interesting here, but I think if I go into pro mode and then deal with the manual mode there, I could get a better shot out of the Zenfone 9. However, I would say Zenfone 9 has a slight edge here in night photography, though the Xperia 5 Mark IV, if you know what you do with manual mode, you can get better shots out of it. Let's take a look at the selfies, and the front-facing camera does better HDR again. However, it falls apart in terms of detail level against the Xperia. The Xperia has overblown highlights for sure in the background, but first of all, the color of my face is not that yellow. It is much more natural on the Xperia 5 Mark IV. The same goes with the background. You can clearly see the green is looking as it is looking outside of my window. It is not as yellow as here. For some reason, it looks like the sun was out on the Zenfone 9, which was clearly not the case because it was raining at this point. So in terms of detail level, clearly you can see the 5 Mark IV is doing a better job. Front-facing camera is going to the 5 Mark IV, even if it doesn't have autofocus. And another zoom shots now with AI zoom enabled on the Xperia 5 Mark IV to see indoors how much of a difference it makes. Contrast, processing, Zenfone 9, again the same thing. It's just overdoing it. More details on the 5 Mark IV. Definitely, even when I go to 5 times, it just looks like almost optical on the 5 Mark IV. And 7.5 times on both also looks better on the Xperia 5 Mark IV. Macro capabilities is one of the advantages of the Zenfone 9 because its ultra-wide angle can do macro capability, can do macro photos, has the macro capability. On the Xperia 5 Mark IV, the ultra-wide angle does have autofocus, but no macro capability, so I had to shoot this with the main lens to get a little bit closer, because the ultra-wide angle, I even had to go a step back to get this little flower in sharpness or in focus. Well, here we can clearly see the Zenfone 9 is doing a better job than the main one. The main one also, I wouldn't even call it macro photography, but close-up shot. The Zenfone 9 gets a lot closer and delivers a bit more details here for sure. So overall, I would say, yeah, I would give the point definitely to the Zenfone 9 if it wouldn't do so much over-processing. And so I think I tend towards the Xperia 5 Mark IV, even though they're very, very close together. And I really like to see them performing against each other by using the Zenfone 9's Gcam mod instead of the native camera app to see how much better the Zenfone 9 can get, and if I can, then crown the Zenfone 9 best compact flagship camera phone right now instead of the Xperia 5 Mark IV, but for now it is the 5 Mark IV. I think we have a clear winner here, and that's the Xperia 5 Mark IV, because its zoom capabilities are much greater, its processing is not so overdone and overcooked like on the Zenfone 9, and also in video I think the stabilization might be better on the Zenfone 9, but focusing is much better on the Xperia 5 Mark IV. So overall, I think the 5 Mark IV takes the crown here. However, it is something that has to be rechecked with the Zenfone 9 and its Gcam mod to see how good it really can be and if it can beat the Xperia 5 Mark IV in this. So stay tuned for another test coming up where I test the Xperia 5 Mark IV with its native camera app and using manual mode against the G-Cam using automatic mode on the Zenfone 9. So that's everything for this video. If you have some questions, ask them in the comments section. That's everything now. Until the next time, bye.